I am going to be extremely interested to hear your take on today's video because it is about a potential new Metal Gear Solid remake, and it's actually not a game that I think people would think of right away when they think, oh, maybe this is the game that should be remade next, if you even think that about the series in general, because I kind of stand by the standpoint that the games were all very good. I've liked all the Metal Gear games for the most part in different ways. I'm okay with things like Delta, if they're good games, I really enjoy that. I don't think they need to be done, but I think they can be. There's also a lot of people who just don't want any of them. They don't want anything touched. And there's a lot of people who are okay with remakes and not okay with anything beyond that without Kojima's involvement because he was so instrumental. So we got a lot of different camps here. And it kind of comes down to the idea that Metal Gear Solid 1 might be getting remade. And those of you who know the early 2000s and maybe had a GameCube, you already know that Metal Gear Solid 1 has already been remade before officially with Metal Gear Solid The Twin Snakes. Now, Twin Snakes was an interesting beast, which will come up in today's topic, because it's very divisive among fans. But it's interesting, this would be the second remake of Metal Gear Solid 1. And so I do have a question of the day for you in general, which is, what do you think about this situation? Because this is not coming out of nowhere. This is actually series producer Noriaki Okamura saying that they would be eager to work on a remake of Metal Gear Solid 1 and talking about potential updates with things like Master Collection Volume 2, saying it's in development. So I guess I'm just wondering what you think about the potential of an MGS1 remake. Especially after Delta, what do you think about that? Because what's interesting with this is that Okamura did describe the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake, Delta, as basically being a one-to-one remake. Now, some people are already like, no, it's not. It's got different camera angles. There's different options here. There's different mini games added in, like, Snake versus Bomberman, or there's the collectibles. But I think what he's meaning here is that it was an attempt to preserve all of the content, all of the discussions, all of this stuff with Metal Gear Solid 3, but to actually add content to it that didn't change the story. So things like those side mini games, like redoing in a different way the Snake versus Monkey, or adding in Snake versus Bomberman. Those don't really change the story. Adding in collectibles, where you go around and you shoot a collectible here and there, that doesn't change the story. So in that way, it's a one-to-one remake, where essentially you have the original game is remade basically from the ground up, and then you have a rebalanced version, which is in the new camera angle. So that's a one-to-one remake. But with this discussion, the idea was that this actually wouldn't be as much of a one-to-one remake in terms of the way that they did Metal Gear Solid 3. Now, when Okamura was asked more questions about this, he did go on to elaborate, saying, personally, and this is just a fantasy with no promises, what I'd want to do is MGS 1. I'd like to see it, though the difficulty would be maximum. And now this is something that's been touched on in the past, because there actually was an interview with Famitsu, or is it Famitsu? I never know how to pronounce this. Let me know in the comments down below. I need the comments anyways. Where Okamura was talking about potential remakes or remakes of previous games that were released in the Metal Gear series coming out in the future. And he had said back in, I believe, October of 2024 or thereabouts, I think we should consider this after we finish making this game, when talking about Delta. For example, if we were to remake the original Metal Gear Solid, or Metal Gear 1 and 2, and that's not Solid, the original Metal Gear 1 and 2, there would inevitably be some aspects that wouldn't work with the same methodology as MGS Delta, including redesigning the levels. As a result, we would have to create many new parts. So we're considering whether we're even allowed to make the next Metal Gear series game, and this is a little bit butchered translation because it's kind of through Google AI, and how far we should go. We want everyone to play MGS Delta, understand their feedback, and then move forward. And I think that that's interesting too, because this is going to show that this was a thought back then. Now, personally for me, if I was going to get games remade, I would want Metal Gear 1 and 2 to be remade, whether they're combined into one game or they are two separate games with an expanded story. But I also know that a lot of people would be frustrated at that or wouldn't want that because Kojima's not here, a lot of original people aren't here. And while Okamura did work with Kojima in the past and did obviously have a presence at Konami, to a lot of people these games are just Kojima's games. And that's kind of what Konami gets, in a way, for having Kojima take center stage with all of the press relations and stuff like that for years. I mean, he was really their PR guy in many ways, where it was like, this is a creator who knows how to talk to the press, who knows how to hype stuff up, let him do his thing, except when their relationship with him soured around MGS5, that completely backfired because he took with him a lot of the goodwill that people had for the Metal Gear series. And so it's something too where they were kind of trying to stretch their legs with Delta. They were trying to see, what can we come up with? What will this turn out as? Will people like it? And overall, I'd say Delta was really good. I mean, people liked it. People thought it was a good game. I think its biggest issues are performance-based issues, with Unreal Engine 5 constantly being a thorn in Konami's side. It's something that, I don't know, I just don't really know if a lot of companies should be pushing right now. But in general, in terms of its content and being a fun game, people really liked Delta. But that said, this is where it kind of becomes controversial, because actually Kojima, I believe, had talked years ago, and I'm going to see if I can find the quote or not, but I remember that he had talked about the idea of a Metal Gear Solid 1 remake many, many years ago before leaving Konami, and even expressed regret on certain things he did in the story. Like, for example, here's a spoiler alert if you don't want to know something about MGS1, killing off Liquid Snake. You know, that was something that he had regrets for, and I believe had insinuated that if he ever redid the story, he would want to change that. But obviously, that would change the entire franchise going forward. I mean, Metal Gear Solid 2, and especially 4, very much rely on Liquid having died there, and then things that come from that. It's not like this was never discussed, and in fact, when people look at something like Twin Snakes as a remake, and they hate it, that's also something where Kojima had allegedly told these creators, you know, Silicon Knights and all these people around it, hey, look, you do what you want with it, maybe try to hype up the action a bit and stuff like that. I mean, he signed off on those cutscenes being more over the top, the things people didn't like about them. The things people didn't like about Twin Snakes, Kojima did sign off on. He didn't make it, but he was totally fine with it when it was made. So this becomes a very nuanced and odd discussion, I would say, where you're like, Metal Gear Solid 1 was a very great game. It's a masterpiece of a video game. Then Twin Snakes comes along years later, and it's very divisive. I enjoy it, but it certainly has some pitfalls to it, and some people just straight up hate it. And Kojima signed off on that. Well, now you have the potential of another remake without Kojima even there. And so you have to ask, well, if Kojima signed off on the remake I didn't like, does that mean that somebody else could come in and do a better job? You know, signing off on one that I will like? Does it mean that maybe we just shouldn't touch this game? It was the perfect storm, and we should leave it alone? I don't really know. I think this is one where it's going to be a lot more controversial of a remake if it is picked up with MGS1, because they already tried it once, and people had very, very divisive feelings on it, whereas with Delta, yes, there are people who didn't like it, but I would say overall it is enjoyed. People did like it. Maybe 100,000 people didn't like it, but for that 100,000 people, a few million did. You know what I'm saying? So, I don't know. I'm interested to hear your thoughts down below. I personally would love an expanded story for Solid Snake with the original Metal Gear 1 and 2 before Solid. I would love games that build the bridge between things like MGS5 and Metal Gear 1, but there is a huge step between remaking something mostly one for one and adding your own content. And that, I think, is where it's going to be difficult. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you enjoyed this video, You want to leave, like, subscribe, I appreciate that very, very much. It helps my channel out a lot. Discount code DJAY123 over on our store, cosmobunny.shop. One-of-a-kind items for one-of-a-kind people who watch this channel. I appreciate you so much. If you're someone who loves to surround yourself with your interests, we make coasters, keychains, trays, and more out of recycled paper from comics, manga, magazines, and other books that have been damaged. We preserve parts of that with resin, use it as a piece of a transformative art, and we recycle the rest. So discount code DJAY123, 10% off over there. Appreciate you. Have a fantastic day. And as always, everyone, stay shui.